The motion that my colleague from Nickel Belt introduced is not about whether we want Dr. Williams or not. And let me be very clear. It is about making sure that this province has transparency in the way our government is making decisions during this pandemic. It's about making sure that people are aware and that all parties in the House here that have been elected rightfully by the people of this province have a say in a committee within a specific deadline as to who and how the Chief Medical Officer is making the decisions that actually determine the way we are addressing this crisis, determine the way we are addressing the way we're actually trying to save lives in this province, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, before I get into the debate, I just want to take a moment to highlight where we are today. As of today, according to the province's data, we have 1,009 new COVID cases that have been reported today. Yesterday, we saw 1,589, a record high number of cases. And that's actually been the trend the last few days. We also have 3.7% positivity rate. But this, in my riding of Scarborough Southwest, is much higher. We have about 11% when it comes to some neighborhoods in Scarborough. 14 people have died since yesterday, 270 school-related cases, and 223 of them are students, Mr. Speaker. And more than 500 people hospitalized. More than 150 people in ICUs, and Ontario cumulatively has 106,510 cases, which is approximately 1/3 of all of the cases across Canada. And last but not least, we have 3,519 deaths. Mr. Speaker, despite the months and months of, about 6 months actually, we have had Ontarians, we have had medical professionals call on this government to be transparent, to be prepared for this pandemic, to be prepared for the second wave, actually. Now it's been about 9 months we're actually into this pandemic. But for the past 5-6 months, we knew there would be a second wave. But when it came to this government, crickets. People were left confused. People were in devastating conditions, but they were given mixed messages. There was guidelines missing for religious institutions. I mean, we had golf courses that had guidelines, and I have nothing against golf courses, Mr. Speaker. But we had childcare that did not have proper guidelines for reopening. We have schools it was a complete mess when it came to the reopening of schools. We had religious institutions that called our offices, and I'm sure government members got the same calls as well. All of this has to do with who is at the command table and who is making these decisions, which is why this debate is so important. And it's mind-boggling that we have this government that has left people behind, that left people on their own in the middle of a pandemic, whether it came to long-term care, whether it came to students in our schools, educators, childcare workers, small business owners. People have been stranded time and time again. We need to know how these decisions are making and whether this government is listening, because the way we see it at home in Scarborough Southwest, this government has mismanaged this pandemic. They have mismanaged the finance, especially, and they claim to have $45 billion that they're spending in the budget, Mr. Speaker. $45 billion to address this pandemic, and yet people are not getting the support. And day after day, we see the Premier in front of the cameras giving people confusing messages. So the question is not whether we want Dr. Williams as the Chief Medical Officer or not. It is about how this government has mismanaged this pandemic and who is at the command table and actually directing what's going on in this province. And that matters. That really matters, because more than 2,000 people died in long-term care. We have more deaths on the way. We have so many cases in schools. The condition of our economy, it's devastating. So when we have the House leader get up, when we have members from the government side get up and continuously try to spin this argument, this debate into this idea of process. And let's talk about process, because yesterday, all afternoon, we heard the government talk over and over again about how important process is, how important it is to make sure that we go through a process for any selection committee. And I want to make it very clear, because the amendment that we have actually does nothing to delay this process. We know we have a chief medical officer until February. The deadline that the member from Nickel Belt has on her motion is actually mid-December. We are asking for just a few days where we focus on all parties, a member from the Greens, a member from the Liberals, 2 members from the official opposition NDP, and 4 members from the government side. And all parties will come together and actually talk to the chief medical officer, who has a ginormous task right now of handling this pandemic. And we understand it's not an easy task. It's a very, very big task, and that is why it's important for all parties to actually sit down and make sure that we do this right. I was shocked, Mr. Speaker. I was shocked to see that the government actually tried to move a sudden unanimous consent motion to get this passed yesterday. It was shocking.
Shocking.
It was shocking to see how they're taking such a big decision without actually talking to opposition parties, talking to the public, listening to anyone. And we know how this government is so full of themselves that they keep applauding themselves in the way they have managed everything. It's mind-boggling that they are talking here about this whole issue and how the NDP, how the official opposition is, trying to delay this or talk about this, the way, he's questioning about Scarborough Southwest, or ask my colleague from Peel region to address this. But if you really look at the issue that we have at hand and see the way this government has managed some of the different regions across the province, not to mention the confusion, in Scarborough Southwest, we have some of the neighborhoods that have been hardest hit by COVID-19. And this government is nowhere to be found when it comes to areas like Cliffside, like Clairlea, like Oak Ridge, like Warden Woods. People need support. And whenever we talk and ask this government how the decision is made, they're back to, well, you know what, command table. Well, who is at the command table and who's listening to who? There was a really interesting phrase. It was the dance partner. Tell us how the decisions are made. Why isn't the government willing to be transparent?
I wish I could dance.
Why isn't the government willing to share with the public whether they're taking the advice from the chief medical officer or not? The cases that we have is that these, the way we hear these numbers from the government, the way we hear the government talk about the amount of deaths, the amount of people affected, they have somehow changed the rhetoric and made people into numbers. Whenever we hear comparison with other provinces, we're continuously hearing the government talk about, so-and-so percentage and what's happening in long-term care. But just for once, have you considered that these are real people? These are real people that are struggling. These are real people who are in ICUs right now. These are real human beings. These are parents in long-term care, mom and dads, People have lost their loved ones during this pandemic. And we would like to know, because I think it's fair for Ontarians who would like to know how the decisions are made so that, whether visitors are allowed at long-term care or not, how that decision is made, and why. Because a lot of people, Mr. Speaker, in long-term care have died due to lack of care, not because of COVID. So people have a right to understand what's going on.
No staff.
Long-term care doesn't have staff, and this government has over and over again talked about how they have addressed the crisis, how they have done so much to address what's going on in long-term care. And yet, we're now 9 months into this pandemic, and the government has yet to address the crisis that's happening within long-term care. Because what's happening with COVID, there's another reality in long-term care homes. And now we're seeing another reality in our schools. And then I can go on about small businesses and what we're seeing. I mean, the fact that there was a decision made to have Walmart and Costco and Joe Fresh and these kind of large, big box stores open, while the small business owners, the little guys whose livelihoods are these small businesses, stay closed, shut their doors, and possibly shut their doors forever because they can't keep up with rent or make any income. I mean, the fact that that decision was made, and yesterday we saw people on the news, buying toys and TVs and all these non-essentials, and then we have the premier stand in front of the camera and try to defend this decision. How was that decision made? Why is the local business in my riding of Scarborough Southwest forced to close while Walmart and Joe Fresh is allowed to open?
Good question.
Why is that right, and how is that decision made? Because that's not fair, Mr. Speaker. That is not fair. And people deserve to know how these decisions are made, because from what we know, is that the premier's buddies, premier's war room staffers are the lobbyists who are actually making the decisions when it comes to Walmart being open, for example. Is it the lobbyist for Walmart is a former staffer of Premier Ford? So are the decisions actually being made using the advice from the chief medical officer, or are decisions being made from the friends and the lobbyists and the close staffers of the premier? People deserve to know the truth. People deserve answers. So hearing government members, the House Leader was angry. He's angry that we proposed this motion. Well, I'm sorry you're angry, but people are literally dying. People are losing their livelihoods. So if you're angry, I don't know, maybe choose a different profession. Because the people that you represent in your riding, the people that we all represent in our ridings, deserve to know the answer to the questions that they have. And this right here is a big decision, and there's a lot of questions right now at hand. And without answering these questions, without having that committee that actually sits together and comes together and all parties come together, and I'm not saying that it has to be just the opposition. I'm not saying it has to be one party. I'm saying all parties come together. Mr. Speaker, it's the reasonable thing to do. It is the wise thing to do. People deserve to know these answers. And frankly speaking, it would actually help the government. It would actually help the chief medical officer. Because right now, we have a lot of media. We have a lot of media articles, a lot of people who are questioning what's going on and how decisions are made across this province. Having an all-party committee that goes through this process, having transparency that allows people to find answers to their questions, will allow people to gain trust again, will allow people to actually have faith in this government. And right now, people don't have that faith. when I hear some of the members talk about, they go on praising about the work that they have been doing, the chief medical officer, it's really interesting how they want to play this identity politics, this sort of politicizing of all the issues we have in this House. Continuously, yeah. Everything is political. Everything is political. But right now, people across the province are struggling.
Stop the cross-aisle chatter. Order, please.
I have the Minister for Small Businesses and Red Tape.
Are you too close there?
I have the member from the Minister from Small Businesses and Red Tape Reduction hackle me right now because I questioned how they're politicizing this. Just the other day, when I asked him about workers as Cosmetica, 180 workers from Cosmetica who were fired.
Excuse me.
It's heartbreaking to hear members and ministers try to politicize this, because just the other day, we found out that the Minister for Small Business and Red Tape Reduction visited a company, a makeup factory in Scarborough that was allowed to stay open. A makeup factory, Mr. Speaker, one that makes lipsticks, foundation, etc., that was allowed to open because this minister allowed them to stay open. How was that decision made, Mr. Speaker? How was that decision made?
Order, please.
And now they will try to hackle me because I clearly hit a nerve. I clearly hit a nerve because, 180 workers were fired.
Back to the member from Scarborough Southwest.
Thank you, Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I think I actually hit a nerve. I think there is a reason why the government doesn't want this motion to go through. Because we really need to know why factories like Cosmetica makeup factory was allowed to open while other businesses are told to shut down. Why Walmart is allowed to stay open when businesses in my riding are told to close their doors. When we know ministers are visiting factories like Cosmetica, when we have workers who have complained about the working conditions there, and then we have and I want to finish my thought. I want to finish this because this is important. It's important to me. It's important to the people of my riding. 180 workers were fired. And we are fighting to get an ROE, a record of employment, from this government, from Cosmetica. Unfairly, they were fired, and now Cosmetica is hiring agency workers when this government was completely fine with it, and they had a visit, actually, to Cosmetica. And it's interesting how the government tried to shut me down while I'm trying to point this out. If we had transparency, Mr. Speaker, we would know how these decisions were made. We would know who is making these decisions. And the people of this province would get answers. It's the least we could do. They are the one who elected us to do this job right here, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much.